Hello, I am Jim Potvin, and in this video I am just going to quickly show you the components of the Excel report that gets created when you run a works analysis and choose to save it. So if we look on the left side, this is just a summary of all of the inputs that would have been used to run the analysis. And if you load a file up, an Excel report file up into Works on the web-based version, it will be these numbers that are used to populate the inputs. In this particular case, we're going to look at a push and walk, so there'll be no barrier. You can see the hand contact locations, the grips that are used, the force parameters, and then some of the other analysis settings. Over on the right are all of the outputs, and so you see a detailed breakdown of the various outputs. For example, the peak compression force is 2178, and the peak compression TLV is 3500, and the ratio of those two is 0.62. So that's what gets put into this body map here. In this graph, it shows the lowest compression DCR through to the highest compression DCR. So it doesn't really change that much in this particular case. Because we've picked a 25th percentile DCR, then from 0 to 100 percentile, we've flagged the values at the 25th percentile. So you can see that the overall is flagged at 0.87, and the left and the right arms are flagged at 0.78. For more details on this graph and the DCR ratios, you can look in this area in Appendix A of the user manual. And so you'll see that there are a couple pages here that will go through how these curves are created and how they're flagged at the 25th percentile and what all of this data means. And also on the third page, there's a description explaining why the overall DCR will sometimes be higher than the highest of the various body part DCRs. So if I come back here, you'll see that the overall of 0.87 is higher than the individual peak values of 0.78. And again, that's explained. I won't go into details here because that's explained in detail in the tutorial video on DCRs or demand capacity ratios, as well as Appendix A of the user manual. So instead of having to hunt through here and pick which one is the highest of the body parts, if you want to target some redesign, these values are ranked. Again, they're from the 25th percentile DCR, so flagged here on the graph. These values are ranked from highest to lowest. So you see the right and the left arm are equal at 0.78, and the overall DCR is always on the left. We can see, for example, the cumulative compression here, the peak compression, the neck being at 0.21, and you can flag the neck here in purple being at 0.21. So that is essentially all of the inputs and all of the outputs. If we come to the summary sheet, you'll see that there is a summary here of all of the inputs, a summary of all of the demands that resulted. So in terms of forces, joint demands, torques, durations, so anything you'd consider demand. And then here is a section on the capacities. And in some cases, those capacities aren't relevant, or there's some that will eventually be added to the table. So for example, arm strength, the arm strength after corrected with the MAE, you can see all of the demand capacity ratios here and some of the other variables. So for example, for this push task, there were about 6,900 postures that were feasible and were assessed. And if you want to summarize all of this data in a database, then you can copy, and so I can copy and I can paste all of this data into a database of report summaries. The only thing I'll point out is when you go to the report, you actually need to highlight both the units and the values in case those are different across different analyses. So you'd copy all the way down or select all the way down to the bottom. Then you'd do copy, so you could go edit or copy or control C. And then I can come to this file, database of report summaries, and I can paste special as values here, or come up to edit and paste special as values. And so then this is just a way that you can collect all of the data in a large database, and you can keep adding to this if you want to run pivot tables. The other thing is each of these has a unique code for if you do run pivot tables so that you can use that unique code. So if we come back to this report, all of the data are flattened out, both the inputs, the outputs, the DCRs, and some of the other parameters for analysis. The other thing here is that there's data here that you can highlight and copy for a cumulative risk analysis. Pushes and pulls are the only two that have two rows here. One would be for the initial phase and one would be for the sustained phase, because those are sort of broken up into two different demands. Sort of the peak demands are important during the short initial phase, and more the sustained fatigue variables are important when you do the longer walking. Each of these variables, there's a separate tutorial that will explain this, and it's also explained in the user manual. So I could highlight this here, I could copy, and then I could come over to the cumulative risk analysis, and I could paste that here. And so you can see one of these conditions is already pasted, and then I could paste a push and paste a lower, or whatever other tasks you have. And you can also expand this out here. So there is a separate tutorial video on the cumulative risk analysis, so I won't go into much more detail here. I just more want you to know when you're in the file, for all other tasks other than a push or pull, you'll just copy in one row of data. For pushes and pulls, you'll copy in both the initial and sustained row. And so the one thing I will point out is if you are doing a lift task, there is now a flag in the file, because when we assess lift and lower tasks, the postures change because the hand locations change. So for this particular example, we're looking at the bottom hand posture. So you can see the hands at the bottom, and you want to run this. This is the only kind of task where you run it twice. You need to run it with the hands at the bottom and then run it again with the hands at the top. You need to save both of those reports. And here you'll see that the row is highlighted in pink because it's not sufficient just to have the bottom analysis or the top. So when you have a lift analysis, you'll have to come and highlight this whole column of data instead of using the row. So you can copy this, and then you can go to a new template that's been created, and I can paste special as values into that column, and that will populate the column here. There's a full tutorial video on this, so I won't explain everything that's going on, but this is just to show you where things go. And this will populate and create a new row that can be pasted in. So this can be pasted in to the cumulative risk analysis, and you can see I've done that for subtask 1. So again, if you want to learn more about combining top and bottom postures for lifts and lowers, I encourage you to look at the tutorial video that was created specifically for that. And if you want to look at how to take those rows of data and combine them into a cumulative analysis using this template, then I encourage you to watch the tutorial on that specific topic as well. There's a section on that in the user manual. But for now, I just wanted to walk you through the reports. The reports are important because that's the one way that you can save all of the inputs and outputs and be able to use either the data in this column or in these rows. But this is also the file that gets read in if you want to take a previous analysis and tweak it, change the forces, change the hand locations, change a lift to a lower, whatever you'd like to do. You can do that by loading in this file.